LibertyNation.com does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We are the Uprising.
On this Uprising, we run down the big news from the Lone Star State with their two big new laws on abortion at the Supreme Court and constitutional carry on the gun control front. That plus an update from LibertyNation.com's own Dave Patterson. Gird your loins, it's time for the Uprising. Gone for months and back for the second time in 2 weeks to the Uprising podcast. What a pleasure. Mr. Timothy Donner, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Scott, how are you?
We are recording at an uncommon hour to accommodate your, for podcast recording, that is.
You're barely
in the anti-meridian segment of the day.
Can we tell the listeners that you're barely awake?
No, that's not true.
Barely
I'm actually animated by all the Supreme Court news. We had a midnight ruling this week.
Yes.
You know, for all news reporters that have to cover like a overnight thing, development or whatever, Tim, I never go to bed and think, gee, I hope the Supreme Court doesn't come out with a midnight ruling that I'm going to have to account for in the morning.
Is this like midnight basketball or something? It's a resumption of that midnight basketball program from the Clinton administration.
I think people are finally coming around to the import of this story. I have had a couple arguments this week about the significance of what's happened with Texas and abortion, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Why is this particularly so significant among the panoply of abortion cases?
Okay,
as you see it.
Because it's in force. It has been so far, it has been allowed to remain in force. So let me just say what the law is. Texas passed a law in May. They actually amended their previously existing abortion law from like 1825 or something like that, that was made, irrelevant because of Roe v. Wade and its legacy. But unfortunately, Texas, like most states, when something like that happens to a law, it's not like they go back and sort of clean up the books and, take it off, pass a new law. It just stays there. So what they did was they amended that law to say that it would be illegal for an abortion provider or anybody else to provide an abortion or help provide an abortion if there were fetal heartbeat or fetal cardiac activity detected, or that the provider declined to do a test to determine whether there was fetal cardiac activity. So you have to have like a no test. And essentially what the doctors are saying is that makes abortions from about 6 weeks and later illegal under the law. And what it's done is it's effectively, one of the,
in Texas.
Yes, sir. Sorry, in Texas. Yeah, right.
In one state.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
But if it's legal to do in Texas, then it will be legal to do elsewhere. There are a number of states that would have the votes, both with respect to the legislature and their governors, to pass a similar law. And a lot of people live in Texas. It's not, Oklahoma.
And many states would not pass it.
Certainly. Well, we're not going to argue about whether some would and some wouldn't.
But this goes to
definitely wouldn't.
Well, but this goes to the federalism argument on abortion. That's sort of what I'm saying.
Why is this a big deal? This is a big deal, Tim, because the Texas legislature and governor have effectively banned abortion in Texas.
Right.
With 85% plus of people who would get abortions being affected by this law, most clinics are just saying, we can't do abortion.
Well, effectively, you're right. I mean, how many, I don't know the answer to this, but how many women are aware that they're pregnant within the first 6 weeks? I'm sure some of them are, but I'm sure, I would guess, the vast majority are not.
It's just, not to get too biological, but it's just around the time when a woman who is pregnant would be thinking, maybe I'm pregnant, not, that I've established that I am pregnant. And then if I don't want to, if I want to terminate the pregnancy, then that's what I'll do.
You miss your cycle once, you miss it twice, and then you're really checking. But 6 weeks in, that does effectively ban abortion. But I think what it does is it sort of upholds what I think is most constitutional in terms of the approach to abortion, which is that each state should be free to decide for themselves what restriction they can make. But that's the federalism argument against Roe versus Wade.
I want to convince you, a pro-life and avid or out, what is the right word? A declared pro-life person,
to be sure,
who opposes abortion on demand. I think it's fair to say, right?
Yes.
Okay. I want to get you to agree that this is a bad law. And I want to get you to agree with Justice Sotomayor, of all people, that this is a bad law. All right. Now, how it came down is, and it's a very interesting procedural. Well, maybe not interesting.
I'm sorry, but you sound like a defense attorney addressing the jury.
I have. It's a jury of one. Okay?
I'm juror number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, all rolled into one.
I read all 4 dissents and the majority opinion, which was very brief. So they went to the district. The people who are opposed to this law went to the district court, as you would usually do, to try to get an injunctive relief, to have the district court say that Texas couldn't enforce this law.
Right.
While it was going through its process to determine whether it would grant injunctive relief, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reached down to the district court and basically said, stop continuing your procedures. We're going to go ahead and just declare that it's not entitled to injunctive relief and let the law stand. And they did so without publishing an opinion on it. So the rest of us couldn't read and understand what legal reasoning they had to allow this. That alone is a pretty hinky kind of a way to go about it. But if it's enforcing a federal law that kind of bolsters people's individual rights, I suppose I wouldn't be averse to it. But here's where things do get interesting, Tim. The way they wrote the law in Texas, and I don't know that the people have this sort of nuance to it, this understanding, it's not a criminal law that says that a woman who gets an abortion, or a doctor who provides her an abortion, may go to jail or prison for a number of years if they're convicted of performing an abortion on a fetus that has a cardiac presence. What it says is that
heartbeat, fetal heartbeat.
Yes. What it says is that any person, you, me, the listeners and watchers of the Uprising, any human being, has the standing to go into a Texas court and say to the judge, this person provides abortions.
Right.
And I am prosecuting this civilly. Okay. If I can demonstrate,
it's almost like a citizen arrest.
It is almost like a citizen arrest.
Yeah.
And because of how Supreme Court and how litigation works when a person sues a state or local government in federal court, it's against a person. So that's why you'll see like ACLU v. Reno is a famous case for the DCMA Act. Okay. The names of individuals, whether they're the heads of prisons or attorneys general in states, those persons are named in litigation because when the Supreme Court rules, they say, you, Mr. Attorney General, cannot put this person to death if it's a state death penalty case, or the warden, for instance, can't. You're enjoined from engaging in this action. But here, because it's not a Texas state official who is empowered to enforce this law, but it's you and I and any other person, the Supreme Court said, right. The majority of the Supreme Court said, because of this novel feature of the law, we don't know who we would enjoin in this measure, and we don't know that it's going to have the presumption that it would fall under our current jurisprudence like it would if it were a district attorney or whatever. Now, Justice Sotomayor is having none of it. She says, because of the court's failure to act rewards tactics designed to avoid judicial review and inflict significant harm on the applicants, I dissent. Okay. Now, Tim, remember we talked about a case last year about New York having this horrible gun law. And when it was challenged, because they were afraid that it was going to not just be overturned, but maybe the court would articulate a more robust standard of Second Amendment jurisprudence at the time, they ran and changed the law. And a lot of people were arguing that the court should still hear the case because they shouldn't reward those folks for just trying to run and change the law to avoid judicial review. And Sotomayor is saying that instead of passing a properly a normal law, quote unquote. That's my word, not Justice Sotomayor's, that they've done a workaround in order to frustrate people's enforcing of their civil rights in the federal court. So here's that all lead in was to get you to get to this question, Tim.
That's just a lead in. Wow.
Was to get you
can't wait to hear.
I assume that you and many of the listeners, because of shallow reporting or misreporting, don't understand the basis of that enforcement.
Headline reporting. Yeah. People read the headlines and maybe the subtitle, and that's it. And they think they've got the whole picture.
Give me a good headline, right? So
sure,
we
know about that.
The question is, if there was a fundamental constitutional right that you both agreed was a fundamental constitutional right, unlike perhaps the right to abortion, and treasured, would you think this was an acceptable way to enforce such a law? In other words, to get this workaround from the court where they can't approach the issue head on because of the peculiar enforcement method that was engineered precisely to create this result, this hitch in how the measure could be enforced.
Is that what you call a loaded question? Do you agree? Have you now, or were you?
I mean, I think
have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
That's the marrow of the question for the court.
Is the fact that you were meeting with a communist on Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street on Friday proof or not?
Are you still a communist? Are you still meeting with communists?
That's right. And you're still beating your wife.
Right.
Look, I am not in a good position to comment on the particular pathway through the court the way that you are. But I think what I can say is that this is the beginning of a sort of maybe not the beginning, but continuation of a bifurcation of abortion law in this country. You're going to have states like Vermont where you can get abortion on demand by snapping your fingers. You're going to have other states like Texas, like Mississippi, Alabama, and a lot of other states too that are outside of the South who are going to use every legal and questionably legal vehicle vessel to stop what they believe is a breach of life, is a breach of human life. And they're going to take, in some cases, extra legal means, I suppose. You're in a better position to judge that than me, but I think, it could be extra legal means. But
the court's going to have to rule. So right now, the court is scheduled to take up another abortion restriction that would include this. In other words, there's already a case on the docket for later in the year about a pre-viability abortion restriction. That's the current. So the current law, well, before midnight on Wednesday, the law was in the United States that if a law or regulation significantly impacted a woman's right to access abortion services, that law was unconstitutional. And there's that goes through to viability of the fetus, which I forget what point of gestation that is for the law, but they're trying to move that back. You know, I always said, Tim, maybe not always.
Well, apparently the Chief Justice agrees with you.
Well, I'm on record as saying that.
Wait, maybe he doesn't. Oh, yes, he does. Oh, wait a minute. Right. Thought 10 years ago. Wait a minute. I thought he said he was pro-choice.
If you want to get a flavor for the different justices, Tim, if you read the Chief Justice's dissent, it's very kind of gentle compared to some of the others. Sotomayor was pissed. She called the law flagrantly unconstitutional in her second sentence of her opinion, and later on she refers to it as clearly unconstitutional. Justice Kagan also called it unconstitutional, but Sotomayor says that a majority of justices have opted to bury their heads in the sand, which is, for people who don't read Supreme Court opinions all the time, that's a shocking insult to her brother and sister justices to say they have their head in the sand. Not that it's just a disagreement.
It's one thing to say you're crashingly wrong, your viewpoint is wrong. It's another to say you're ignoring the facts. Basically, it sounds like she's saying that they're trying to uphold an ideological position at all costs. That's what that sounds like.
And it's just good law for now. This isn't what Justice Kagan said was that
can I stop you for just one sec? Because we talk a lot about the sanctity of Roe versus Wade and how any law that might come in conflict with that Supreme Court decision of 1973 is
the landmark,
inherently unconstitutional. But let me ask you this question, apart from what you believe religiously in terms of faith and atheism versus Christianity, all this stuff. But strictly from a judicial legal standpoint, was that a good,
horrible decision? No, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
So then why should
it's all built on a house of cards? Like so much of our.
Then why should we grant it the benefit of the doubt?
Here's why.
In a case where a state simply wants to control its own
the system only works,
the
Tim.
taking of life.
The system
taking of life, and
the system only works if there's an actual law that comes down that is universal throughout the states with respect to what constitutes.
But there shouldn't be. That's the whole point. Is that federalism dictates that there should be each individual state can determine whether abortions are impossible or easy.
There are plenty of people who are pro-life who argue that there needs to be a national prohibition on abortion because it is, in fact, a human life, and you can't authorize legally the taking of that life, even though you call it, a medical service or whatever it is. So
there is viability to that argument. I think it basically, it comes down to this quite simply. I think looking at the broader picture, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is the composite of the American ethos. You can't have the second and the third if you don't have the first. That sums it up for those of us that are pro-life and believe that first promise, the ability to have life, is the underpinning for everything that follows from it.
The question of where to draw those lines, it gets you're talking about a little bit murky. Even if you agree with that sentiment,
but there's rape and incest questions which are always used to
and we don't need to focus on those because
the principal focus is protecting an innocent life, and the fact is that the only thing that every human being on this earth has in common is that they were once a fetus.
Right.
Is that not true?
Well, there's probably other elements they have in common as well with biology and and other things, but they do have that in common. But I don't know that that's a powerful argument against all abortion. Abortion.
We have to. I think it's also important to point out from those of us that are pro-life that there's love of God and there's love of the Constitution, and when they clash, we're compelled to follow the law. So the law is what the law.
Well, what the law is where I occupy myself, and that I think is unclear at this point, and that's the fascinating issue. What will, when the Supreme Court does go back to examine they have this case that's already on the docket that involves a pre-viability restriction, and they've taken it basically. Both people on the pro-life and the pro-choice side have seen it as the court has taken this to kind of re-examine their fundamentals on the abortion question.
If they weren't going to do that, they wouldn't have taken the case, would they?
It's difficult to say, Tim, exactly
there must be, because what I'm saying is, how many abortion cases have they refused to rule on, have they kicked out, that didn't achieve cert over the years, and they chose this one? There must be a reason, right?
Yes, I just think that we're in troublesome waters if we presume to know the reason why that it is, and I don't like to do that because we can get ourselves in trouble for it. But the reason why you said we have, you didn't let me answer the question about the Roe v. Wade thing, and I'll tell you why we have to give that so much purchase and respect. It's not because we respect that decision, but if the system of laws and is to produce order, we have to be able to have a precedent that's established and then honored. Now, I'm not saying that precedent has to be established by 9 people who aren't elected, who serve life terms or anything like that.
But what about in the event that it's wrongly decided, that history judges that something was wrongly
well, then
decided
there can be methods
based on new revelations?
Americans could have passed a constitutional amendment allowing abortion anytime from 1973 until now, and there hasn't been the political will or success to do so.
That's true, and that's because, look, there is the rule of law and what's at play here. And I think the pro-life movement does not make this argument effectively enough, and they should, which is that we're talking about a clash between perhaps the 2 most powerful rights that a person can have.
And the 2 most powerful political kind of...
Which is the right to control their own body.
Yes.
And the right for a human being to be born. And those people like me, I think, feel and respect how powerful the right of any individual is to control his or her own body. It's just that in this case, it's trumped by the right of a fetus to achieve life. That's what it is. It shouldn't be viewed in a complete vacuum. There should always be the stipulation that a woman's right to choose should hardly be discarded. It's significant. It's just that the right of a person to have life overrides it.
Well, we'll see if the court agrees with you. Let's turn before we let you go
that's a whole different matter.
Yeah,
that's a whole different matter.
Let's turn to the political angle.
Yes.
Let's listen to Jen Psaki here.
Oh, do we have to?
Does the administration have a message for industry and private businesses that have operations in Texas? Like, would the president and the White House support a boycott of sorts against Texas?
That's not a call we're making from here. What our effort and what the focus of the federal government is to look for every resource, every lever at our disposal to ensure women in Texas have the ability to seek health care.
Following up on the Texas law, why does the president support abortion when his own Catholic faith teaches abortion is morally wrong?
Well, he believes that it's a woman's right, it's a woman's body, and it's her choice.
Why does the president, who does he believe then should look out for the unborn child?
He believes that it's up to a woman to make those decisions and up to a woman to make those decisions with her doctor. I know you've never faced those choices, nor have you ever been pregnant, but for women out there who have faced those choices, this is an incredibly difficult thing. The president believes their rights should be respected. Go ahead. I think we got to move on. I think we have to move on. You've had plenty of time today. Go ahead.
You've had plenty of time today. Plenty of time.
Now, for those who don't know, you are LibertyNation.com's senior political analyst. And with that in mind,
I might stipulate that we don't yet have a junior political analyst.
Hey, listen, it's good.
We're looking
don't denigrate the title.
Send your applications to Scott's email.
Write them on the back of a $20 bill and mail it in.
Early and often.
Is this all gravy for Joe Biden, who obviously rose to office on a pro-choice platform to the extent that it was discussed at all? Clearly no pro-life leanings for him. Or does the presence of congresspersons in purpley places or places where there's lots of Catholics, for instance, present some political downside to him weighing in strongly on this?
Oh, I think he's not going to say one word. First of all, he is politically crippled. I mean, at this point, he's in a political wheelchair because lest you think it's just the Afghanistan debacle, and we could go on forever about that.
We'll be talking about that with Dave Patterson next on the Uprising.
Yes, and I'm sure he'll speak far more coherently than me about it. But here's the thing, Scott. This is why he's not going to say a word about abortion or much of anything else for a while, I think, except to tout the marvelous victory in Afghanistan and the historic airlift out of there. But he's got so many other problems. This crisis on the southern border is metastasizing. It's getting worse. And there's no solution other than to go back to what Trump did before everything, which Biden overturned. He's getting 39% approval on his handling of the economy.
Right, but could this turn that around, though? Could he get a big bump from pro-choicers who say,
no,
we want to make sure that we've got...
Biden doesn't get any credit here. I think it's a totally separate sort of narrative and process that's going on, because Biden, in addition to all of that, you've got inflation, which has now risen more than 100% since he took office. Crime continues to rise in cities. The response to the pandemic and the Delta variant is increasingly incoherent. We're getting all manner of mixed messages. And Scott, here's the thing. This was incredible. I wrote this story and it led in Liberty Nation this morning. 52% of people, 52% in the Rasmussen poll think that this president should resign. A majority of Americans think he should resign.
Where did that number get to for Trump?
I don't know that I have the numbers for that particular question.
Yeah.
But as I said in the story, 30% would be surprising, saying he should resign 7 months into office.
Right.
A 40% would be stunning. 52%, and that, Scott, includes 48% of independents. This guy is politically crippled right now, so I don't think he's going to step into the abortion debate. But you're right. It might firm up his support among all those Democrats, among the 81 million who are willing to overlook his obvious cognitive decline and vote for him anyway.
Yeah, well, policy is more important than cognitive decline, Tim. Come on now.
Yeah, obviously policies are what they voted for. Policies are what they got. That's for sure. It's a disaster, Scott. It's a dumpster fire. It's really more like a tire fire in the White House, because it just keeps burning and it won't go out. And Kamala Harris is, in this poll, as much, if not more, unpopular than Biden is. So, as I say in the story, what the hell do the Democrats do now?
Well, we will have to encourage people to keep up with the answer to that question in future writings of yours on libertynation.com, senior political analyst. And once again, back on the Uprising. Thanks so much for joining us, Tim.
100% of the time, a pleasure.
Thank you. After Tim and I spoke, I happened to see this video, which helps make his point.
Said in a 7-2 decision that in the first 3 months of pregnancy, only the woman and the court said in a 7-2 decision that in the first 3 months of pregnancy, only the woman and her physician may decide whether she may have an abortion. In the second 3 months, all the state may do is regulate abortion procedures. And only in the final 3 months of pregnancy can the state forbid abortion. The court ruled in cases from Texas and Georgia, but all 50 states are effective, whatever their laws.
Today's decision came as a shock to both anti- and pro-abortionist forces. For some women, this law will mean the difference between having an abortion or not. For many others, the law will mean simply having the abortion in their own state instead of traveling to another state like New York. This New York clinic, for example, reports that 48% of its patients are from out of the state.
So back before Roe v. Wade, in states that were restrictive, those people from that state had the burden to then travel to a state where abortion was legal. There's another potential that we didn't really get into in our discussion, which is that the Supreme Court could find that all abortion is illegal after a certain period. So instead of going on the sort of permission side, going on the prohibition side. And that is sort of the greatest fear of the pro-choicers and perhaps the greatest hope for the pro-lifers. But in any case, that's all on the table in the upcoming Supreme Court term. We'll obviously keep you abreast of it. It is fascinating and remarkable. See it all right there. So at least for a legal geek like me. All right. The other interesting news out of Texas, in addition to their new abortion law, which started September 1, is they started a constitutional carry law on September 1. And this is a huge deal because what it did was the constitutional carry means that as a constitutional right, you have the right to carry a firearm. That expresses itself in a couple different ways. In Texas, it's the sort of most free, which is that if you're not prohibited legally from carrying a firearm, then you have the right to carry a firearm. You don't have to apply for any permission slip or get fingerprinted or go through a background check. You are presumed to be free to exercise, this fundamental right and be armed about your day. So it doesn't require you that you be a citizen of Texas or a resident of Texas. If you go there on vacation, you can bring a firearm, and again, if you're not prohibited, you can arm yourself. Now, there are restrictions on where you can go. I don't know what their restrictions are with respect to like schools or, there's some places that have like houses of worship restrictions, which makes no sense to me. But any place, and anyway, check the law. Obviously, Jeff Charles, for instance, if you're listening to this, before you go carrying in Texas under the constitutional carry rules, to make sure that you know where you are carrying is legal. But it's a big change in the law because constitutional carry is a number of states have it, but they're generally states with small populations. And Texas is 30 million, I think. And just that probably added 40% more human beings who are now covered under our constitutional carry law. So that's the wave of the future for, I think, the pro-gun movement, where they want to see things go. And they have been so far victorious on the carry front. It's been slow but steady ever since the Florida shall issue carry law was passed in, I don't know when it was, 85 maybe. All right, let's go ahead and get into things for an Afghanistan update. Joining us again to discuss it is Dave Patterson. Dave, I keep butchering your title, and I'm sorry. It's former Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense and a U.S. Air Force veteran, and you are our expert for matters on military and defense on the pages of libertynation.com. Thanks so much for coming back to the Uprising.
Scott, great to be with you, and not to worry, because the number of names before your name indicates how little responsibility you actually have.
Yeah, right. Well, it's easy. There's some great managerial line, which is like, well, we can't give them money, so we'll throw titles at them, which probably works for a little while.
That's right. Narcissists arise, right?
Yes. Well, it tugs at all our egos, right? So there you go.
Exactly.
But it does put you in a position to speak more knowledgeably than others and understand when you read the news. When I read about a Supreme Court decision, I can often kind of read sort of between the lines and see, maybe pick out some other things that other people can't. And I don't have that ability with respect to the Afghanistan issues. And so that's why you're here. I want to talk about what's going on since we last visited, what's the latest, what's going on with our people there, and the implications for our military. So let me just open the floor to you, and let's.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack that, one item at a time. With regard to what's happening with the people that were in fact left behind in Afghanistan, what you're seeing now is more and more of independent actors. Pineapple Express, made up of special operators who are going one-on-one to attempt to bring people at risk and also citizens left behind out of Afghanistan, or at least to safety. So that's one thing that's going on. The other thing on a much broader...
Before you move on, do you have a sense of how many U.S. citizens are currently in Afghanistan and want to get out?
Well, we're told anywhere between 100 and 200. And of course, that's like a plus or minus 100%
right.
Error rate.
Yeah.
But probably somewhere slightly north of 100 probably is the best guess. Mm-hmm. And I think that the problem is that they're probably widely separated. They're non-government organization individuals. There are people who simply could not make it to Kabul, and consequently realized that the number of checkpoints that they'd have to go through in Taliban territory was too daunting, and probably went back home.
Okay. So I interrupted. You were talking about the broader...
Yeah, I think that what you're going to see here is there's a phenomenon in Washington that there are two ways to kill a project or an idea or an issue. One is to make it so big that nobody can get their head around it.
Right.
And the other is to make it so small that it's insignificant and no one cares. And I think what you're seeing is that the narrative out of Washington is the former rather than the latter. You're going to see people saying, we've got to study this whole effort that we made in Afghanistan starting 20 years ago to see where we made our mistakes. Well, okay, fine. There have been thousands of studies iteratively throughout these 20 years.
Right.
And what will end up happening is interesting, but nothing.
A Rand Corporation result that's as tall as I am when printed out that no one will ever read.
Absolutely. And on the other hand, you'll have those who go after a person. That's equally unimportant and not very effective. People calling for Secretary of State Antony Blinken's, to resign or to fire him or to one thing or another. Well, he is simply a symptom of a much broader and more devastating problem within this administration. And Scott, it's simply they have a bunch of incompetence. They have people who are sycophants. Well, tell me what you want me to do, boss, and we'll go do that.
Right.
And then they pick up the narrative, and it's as if it were true.
How many? So this is the top military brass we're talking about for those sycophants, or they're in the civilian area? Would you say, or both?
I think both. Absolutely. I mean.
So for those of you who don't, well, let me interrupt with another question, because you have a sense of this and I don't. I don't think most of our listeners and viewers do. How many people are we talking about at the top of the military that you'd have to clean house to get rid of all that and just get some workaday folks that aren't involved in sort of playing those politics? Is that 100 people, 1,000 people, more, less? What are we talking about?
No, I think that there's probably 5 or 6 people that would be worthy of replacing. Yeah, okay. I mean, I think that unfortunately, the Secretary of Defense, he's just been a mouthpiece for the administration, has not been very effective in dealing with this problem. You don't see him commenting on it in too many times. I think the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is culpable here, and a number of others that probably ought to be looked at for replacement. Okay. I found, as we looked at the reports coming in, the commander of CENTCOM, the combatant commander, I mean, he made a terrible mistake when he stopped the air support to the Afghan security forces. He left them basically without any overhead cover.
Right.
And then, of course, the decision not to secure Kabul when he had the opportunity. And Baradar gave him that opportunity. He opened the door and said, you can do it or we can do it. And his response was, I only need the airport.
Okay. And do you think that was at that level, or did he, was that a Biden decision?
From what we understand, it was his interpretation of what Biden, the commander-in-chief, wanted to have happen. But if he knew that it was not a good decision, he should have said, this is not a good decision and I can't carry it out. Right. Here's my resignation.
Well, too few heroes on all sides of the aisle do go forward with one of those things. All right, let me ask you this. You talked about the kind of, what the two-step of avoiding accountability is going to be. What about in the next couple weeks, 3 weeks here? What are we going to see? Do you have a prediction? Are things going to get better than they have? I mean, it's hard to imagine they're getting worse, but I know there is room for that. So what's your prediction? What do we see going forward?
My prediction is that the standard media will do everything they can to remove Afghanistan from their teleprompter. Right. And so will the White House, and it will become yesterday's news, and they will try to do that. They will try to keep that out of their narrative and it's up to others to try to bring it back into the narrative. But they've made a terrible mistake, and one that one would hope would stay with them.
Well, I know that we know that as long as there's news and analysis out of Afghanistan worth reporting on, you're going to write about it, and we encourage you to do so, and we'll read about it in the pages of LibertyNation.com. Dave, thanks so much for joining us on The Uprising.
Hey, thank you, Scott. Always good to be with you.
I hope that events don't require a return visit soon, but it'll be nice to see you if it does, in any case.
Well, it's something we can thank the Biden administration for. There's always something.
It's one of the few things that, I'll have to remember to be thankful for. Thanks.
You bet, Scott.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks once again to my guests, and thanks you for joining us as well. That's it for this edition of The Uprising. Remember to hit Liberty Nation News for original articles, the Rabbit Hole podcast, and our signature television program, The Conservative 5. Just go to libertynation.com on your browser, or hit Rumble, YouTube, or check out our Liberty Nation News Roku channel. I'm Scott Cosenza. Thanks for watching. This program is a production of libertynation.com, conservative news where truth matters.
Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.
We are the Uprising.